What a lovely new house. It looks so comfortable and functional. Those words rang through our meticulously planned new home. My in-laws, who had arrived unannounced at our newlywed home, carelessly placed their mud-covered old suitcases right in the middle of our carefully cleaned living room. To my absolute horror, they announced they would be living with us starting today. I confronted my husband, Timothy, in disbelief, demanding to know how this could happen without any discussion. He brushed off my concerns, saying his mother would help with the housework and I would get used to it soon enough. He insisted it was normal for family to support each other, completely dismissing my objections. Timothy, deeply influenced by his parents, had grown up in an old-fashioned style where, quite frankly, a wife was viewed as nothing more than a convenient housekeeper. A perspective shared by his parents. I had endured his father calling me, the rebellious woman, at our weekly dinners with an air of casual contempt. Then, claiming we didn't have enough rooms, my husband ordered me to vacate my personal space. "You can sleep in the garden, lucky you, you won't have to deal with my parents," he sneered mockingly. Fighting back tears, I ran to my room and returned dragging a suitcase as heavy as my in-laws. To their shock, I announced loudly, "I'm going back to my parents' house, enjoy yourselves. I'm Haley, and I work in product development at a health food company." I'm 32, and so is Timothy, who works in the sales department of the same company. He was always a thoughtful person, a hidden talent who excelled as the backbone of any team. He was one of the best in his department, and I was proud to call him my husband. We first met at a department meeting where I caught his attention wearing an elegant outfit with an antique ring on my pinky finger. He became fascinated by my hobby of collecting antique jewelry. When he admitted he thought the ring was a flashy jeweled piece from my family collection, I showed him more practical designs. We quickly began going out for meals after work and on weekends, and our relationship progressed rapidly. With the blessing of many colleagues and supervisors, he proposed within 6 months. Even before marriage, we shared a dream of building our own home. Our goal was to contribute equally, take out a loan, and create our own house, small but carefully crafted down to every detail. Thinking about our future children and pets, we wanted a spacious living room and garden. Though we might not have had a huge budget, I was determined to work harder than ever, save more money, and do whatever was necessary. We had many requirements for the house. While we had a location in mind, we needed to consider factors like transportation and shopping convenience. Imagining having children someday, we had countless essential points to consider, from the exterior design to practical details. Working with an architecture firm, we meticulously planned and worked tirelessly to create our dream home. The real estate agent showed us a plot near my in-laws' house, assuring us they were very kind and wouldn't cause any trouble. While they were indeed kind during visits, I found my mother-in-law's cooking skills somewhat frightening. His family once owned much of the land in the area, but most had been sold off except for their residence. Fortunately, these connections gave us priority in securing our plot. Through these connections, we settled on a location near my in-laws' house. I hadn't had many chances to get to know my in-laws beyond formal greetings, so I felt cautious and was extremely nervous about how to interact with them. However, they always seemed cheerful and kind, appearing genuinely happy whenever I visited. My father-in-law was the family patriarch with a strong sense of responsibility, and my mother-in-law was a devoted housewife. When they learned about our plans for the new house, they excitedly supported us, and I thought they were wonderful in-laws. As construction progressed, Timothy and I visited his parents' house. Though the house was nearby, it wasn't next door, and I wanted to make a good first impression. Their traditional American-style house was large, and its size always overwhelmed me. They always greeted us with smiles, telling us how proud they were of their son taking such a big step in building his own home. They would say things like how wonderful it was that we were getting a nice new house, unlike their old one. My mother-in-law would excitedly tell me how thrilling it must be to build a house. Timothy suggested spending more time with his parents while our house was under construction, since it would take a while to complete. I agreed, though somewhat hesitantly. We started receiving holiday invitations since Timothy maintained good relations with his parents and always kept them informed about his business trips and weekend plans. The visits started innocently enough, shopping at the mall or having meals at their house, but I soon felt there were no boundaries. For instance, my mother-in-law would call on Friday nights with endless requests and demands. She would ask me to take her shopping for a handbag for her friend, invite us to Sunday lunch promising to prepare fish, and instruct me to bring specific dishes since she was making fried foods, stews, and salads. She would go on about what to wear, filling up our entire weekend schedule with detailed demands. I secretly consulted my friends about whether this level of demands from in-laws was normal, but they all criticized my in-laws' strange behavior. As my work in product development became busier, these frequent visits to my in-laws' house bred growing distrust, and I began to dread them, feeling increasingly trapped. One day, I finally found the courage to refuse over the phone. I explained that the frequent visits were becoming overwhelming and that I needed some quiet weekends. I admitted, somewhat embarrassed, that I was barely managing to balance work and housework. But my mother-in-law was stubborn, insisting, "Don't be shy, we're family," and I couldn't escape that weekend's plans. Reluctantly, I went to their house with a heavy heart. What made it worse was that Timothy, knowing he had tried to decline the invitation himself, berated me throughout the car ride, warning that his mother was hurt and his father might criticize me. At their house, as dishes cluttered the dining table, the topic came up again. I felt like I was sitting on pins and needles. My father-in-law pointed at his wife and demanded to know why I couldn't help out, suggesting it wasn't that difficult for me. He went on to say that while it might be too much for his wife, I could do my housework on weekdays and then come clean their apartment, since I was just a working woman with plenty of time. I was shocked by his suggestion and tone. His attitude toward his wife, a homemaker, was filled with misguided assumptions and harsh expectations. I felt speechless, feeling more like an employee receiving orders than a family member. What frightened me most was how my mother-in-law smiled and nodded at my husband's instructions as if they were perfectly normal. A chill ran down my spine. Fortunately, I managed to decline the proposal to take over their housework. In contrast to her submissiveness, my repeated refusals made my father-in-law mutter "disobedient" under his breath. My irritation grew, and I could feel my heart pounding rapidly. My father-in-law quickly became sullen, and my mother-in-law hurried to tend to him. The tension in the air was suffocating, and I quietly resolved to stop visiting my in-laws. The following week, when my mother-in-law called, I tried to make excuses about having other plans. The terrifying thought occurred to me that if we completed our new house near them, we would have to see them not just on weekends, but every day. When she persisted, asking why I couldn't help as my husband had suggested since I wasn't finished with work, I had my answer ready. I told her I had plans to meet with wedding guests as a thank you, but would visit when schedules aligned, and asked her to give my regards to my father-in-law. I rushed through the excuse and managed to end the call. Though the promise was a lie, I quickly left the house, feeling anxious about staying there. From that day on, I kept finding excuses to avoid visiting my in-laws. My mother-in-law's explanations sounded as if she was discussing household chore arrangements for when I would live with them. Wait a minute, why are you telling me all this? I wondered aloud. When I asked what she expected me to do with all this information about cleaning supplies and kitchen use, her face showed genuine surprise. You married into our family, Haley. So you need to follow our customs. Didn't you know that? Don't you want to contribute to your husband's family? She said with conviction. Then she asked me how long I planned to keep working. I was speechless. I had absolutely no intention of quitting my job. It became clear she expected me to eventually quit and become a full-time housewife to help with their housework. Shocked by this unexpected development, I firmly stated my position. In that case, I'm leaving, I declared. I understand my duties as a wife and will help where I can, but my priority is time with my husband. With my job and our own housework, I can't help you guys here, I said as I immediately left their house. When I protested to Timothy, he took his parents' side and wouldn't listen. I didn't marry into this family to become your housekeeper, I told him, but he only grew more irritated. You're always so selfish. My parents can't be wrong. Why can't you get along with them? He snapped. I was left speechless, only able to stare at him in disbelief. I was shocked. Not just by the vast difference in values with my in-laws, but by Timothy's complete refusal to consider my perspective. He wasn't usually like this, but when it came to his parents, especially his father, he transformed completely, treating their words as absolute law. The decision to build our house had initially started with his father's suggestion to purchase land to maintain good relations with the real estate agent. The word a divorce suddenly flashed through my mind, but since Timothy was often away on business trips and we had just built our dream home, I decided to wait and see if we could maintain distance from his parents. However, I made it clear to Timothy that I wanted no involvement with his parents. Your family dynamic is far from a normal in-law relationship. To be honest, I don't want any more involvement. I won't visit for housework, and I have no intention of living with them. Remember that, I told him seriously. I expected him to be angry, but surprisingly, Timothy said, I understand. I'll handle my parents from now on. 1 month later, on a weekend while I was preparing lunch at home, Timothy returned from his morning outing accompanied by multiple voices. I was shocked to see my in-laws entering our living room with large luggage. Oh my, how lovely and clean. Well, it's new after all. Such a comfortable-looking house, my father-in-law exclaimed with a booming laugh. Timothy proudly showed them around while carrying their heavy suitcases and bags. When I confronted him, he revealed the unbelievable. His parents would be living with us starting today. Why? Without any discussion? I demanded. Since you don't like spending time with my parents, I've been thinking about this. I arranged it. Don't worry, Mom will help with housework. You'll get used to it. It's good for family to support each other, so there's no problem, he said, as if doubting I wouldn't welcome his parents' cohabitation was unthinkable. I felt despair, knowing how difficult life would be with in-laws whose values were so different from mine. While I had been determined to avoid living with them, I discovered our house and land had already been sold to them without my knowledge. The moving preparations had been done completely behind my back. They had brought just their essential belongings, with larger furniture stored in a warehouse. I felt completely betrayed, especially since I had just told Timothy I wanted minimal contact with his parents. Why did you make this decision without consulting me? Why did you proceed unilaterally? Didn't you consider my feelings? This is about our future life together. We should have discussed this. But Timothy was indifferent, looking at me as if I were an inconvenience. Well, if my parents want to live here, what can we do? Think of it as a trial period. Since you said you didn't want to be involved, I handled the sale and moving preparations myself. Trial period? The house has already been sold. What are you saying? Doing this behind my back is nothing short of betrayal. You're part of the family now, so show some understanding and patience, he raised his voice with confused logic. I was stunned, realizing that in his eyes, my thoughts and opinions held no value. Ignoring me completely, he began showing his parents upstairs. Our house had 3 private rooms, Timothy's study, my room, and our shared bedroom. As I wondered where he planned to put everyone, he bluntly told me to clear out my belongings. I wasn't surprised, but I was visibly shaken. Mother will use your room. Father will take the bedroom. You can sleep in the garden. After all, you didn't want to interact with my parents, right? He said with a cruel smile. It was obvious there weren't enough rooms once his parents each took one. The smirk on his face as he suggested I sleep in the garden showed this was his way of deliberately punishing me. I felt suffocated by this rejection from the man I had loved. While my father-in-law smiled smugly, Timothy was clearly following his parents' orders. I could imagine they had put him up to intimidating me. He had chosen to side with his parents instead of protecting me. This realization brought a new wave of despair, and I could only watch silently as he demanded I clear out my room immediately. I felt there was no point in arguing anymore. I went to my room, grabbed the heavy suitcase I had prepared in advance, and left with a speed that surprised Timothy. I'm going back to my parents. Enjoy yourselves, I announced. I had kept my belongings organized and ready to return home at any time. Whatever I left behind in the room now didn't matter, they could throw it away for all I cared. Timothy and his parents looked surprised and tried to stop me. My mother-in-law even accused me of pushing housework onto her, though that had been her aim from the beginning. It was clear from her difficult life with my demanding father-in-law that she hadn't loved her family even before marriage. Instead of fighting back, she had tried to find a new target in me, her daughter-in-law. Ignoring all her manipulations, I headed straight to my parents' house. When I arrived home, my parents were shocked but understood the situation and expressed their anger toward Timothy and his parents. I felt supported and relieved, but that lasted only until Timothy contacted us. He came to my parents' house with his parents, saying he would forgive me if I came back. Anticipating a confrontation at home, I had called a certain place in front of my parents. The 6 of us sat around a table, and my father especially glared at Timothy and his parents with intense anger after hearing the situation. But Timothy and his parents showed no remorse. Instead, my father-in-law began criticizing me as an unreasonable wife who wouldn't contribute to her husband's family. My father watched them in disbelief. My father-in-law berated me, "Haley, you should act like a more sensible wife. Still working instead of devoting yourself to your husband and family, you should be grateful we allow that. Running back to your parents, who do you think you are? Your complaints are trivial compared to your wifely duties." My mother-in-law echoed his criticisms, with Timothy parroting his parents' words. The conversation in my parents' living room grew increasingly chaotic. Every time I tried to express my feelings, the situation only worsened. Their arguments became increasingly hostile. Suddenly, my father interrupted. "I can't believe you're forcing these things on her. She may be Timothy's wife, but she's still my daughter. If you say she's not good enough, we'll take her back and make her happy. Let's get a divorce." Encouraged by my father, I pulled out divorce papers I had printed from a website before they arrived. My part was already filled out. All it needed was Timothy's signature. Seeing this, my father-in-law and Timothy exploded in anger. "This is nonsense. You think this is a solution? A wife considering divorce so easily? Taking such extreme measures. You coward," my father-in-law shouted, while Timothy added with a sour expression, "We haven't even had a proper discussion. Can't you be more rational? This is why women can't have logical conversations." They both continued accusing me of trying to destroy the family. They kept repeating, "How arrogant," regardless of place or situation, claiming they wanted to talk while clearly being incapable of rational conversation. I had given up on talking and was focused solely on getting Timothy to sign the divorce papers. However, their terrible attitude wasn't the only reason. "I have something to ask you," I said to my mother-in-law, taking out my smartphone and showing her a video. Her previously calm expression changed dramatically the moment she saw the screen. It wasn't surprise, she recognized what she was seeing. The footage showed her opening drawers in my room. After I had refused to help with housework at their home and began limiting contact, I had noticed items gradually disappearing from my room. In those drawers was my large antique jewelry box. The very one that had sparked conversations with my husband. While most pieces weren't particularly valuable as I had bought them for their designs, some were worth something and needed to be kept locked up. The stolen items included not just visibly expensive jewelry, but antique rings, accessories, and the contents of my locked box. Each item was a precious part of my collection, and my blood ran cold knowing someone had been invading my room. I had considered who might be responsible, but it seemed unlikely Timothy would target my antiques for money since we shared finances. He had never criticized my collecting and knew I mostly bought inexpensive pieces. The vanishing of gemstone jewelry evidently suggests a motive to liquidate them for cash. Realizing someone might be entering when I was away, I bought a small camera and hid it in my room. Concealed in furniture shadows, the camera caught the culprit entering when no one should have been there within just weeks. It was my mother-in-law. Unless Timothy had lent her a key or made a copy, no one could have entered without my knowledge. She had likely been stealing precious metal jewelry bit by bit when the house was empty. Confronted with this irrefutable evidence, she turned pale and cried out, "I've already sold them. I can't return them." My mother-in-law became hysterical, tearfully confessing the items had been sold to someone. When I mentioned claiming damages, she screamed, "That's a lie, absolutely not." While my collection was mostly inexpensive, it included some high-end pieces from famous stores. The stolen items included these valuable pieces, which she had likely targeted because they were kept carefully locked away. Their cash value must have been substantial. It meant claiming damages of tens of thousands of dollars, an amount impossible for a housewife to pay. My father-in-law glared at me, trembling with rage, not even scolding his wife for the theft before suddenly exploding. "Are you trying to play games with us? Planning to sue over such trivial matters? Since you married into this family, you should obey rather than decorating yourself with childish trinkets. Why don't you work on self-improvement instead? Like losing some weight?" Blushed with anger, my father-in-law seemed to genuinely believe that once I married into their family, I became their property. He was simply furious that I wouldn't obey everything they said. Enough of this nonsense, he finally stood up and tried to raise his hand against me, but my father quickly intervened to stop him. Just then, the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of someone I had contacted. It was a divorce lawyer I had been consulting since the theft suspicions arose and I began considering divorce. An older, dignified attorney from a law firm known for handling divorce cases. His presence brought a serious atmosphere to the room, and my in-laws seemed to shrink before his authority. The lawyer explained that he would first seek compensation for my mother-in-law's theft, then presented evidence of unfair demands and treatment by Timothy and his parents. This included my diary entries, recordings, and the hidden camera footage, all admissible as evidence. He explained we could also claim damages for emotional distress. When divorce and property division were discussed, Timothy began to panic and plead. "Drop this ridiculous idea of divorce. We love each other. Do you really want to separate?" he begged, practically groveling. His parents chimed in, saying, "Yes, reconsider. You can still withdraw this." They expected me to withdraw the divorce, but to me, any further involvement with them seemed like a waste of time. "You're wrong about us still loving each other. I really want this divorce. I'll consult with lawyers as many times as necessary," even if it takes time or goes to court. My firm rejection made Timothy shrink with defeat, and perhaps due to the lawyer's authority, his parents reluctantly agreed to the divorce. When the lawyer asked my mother-in-law about her reason for theft, a shocking truth emerged. She was a reckless spender who had run out of living expenses after wasteful shopping, and unable to tell her husband, she had planned to borrow money from Timothy. While he was away on business, she had used a spare key to take money from the bedroom drawer. That's when she noticed the rings and, thinking there might be more, searched the room and found my jewelry box and locked case. She had quickly taken them to a locksmith, lying about losing the key, and after getting them opened, took the contents and returned empty boxes. She had continued breaking in and stealing whenever she ran short of cash. Hearing this, my father-in-law turned to her and called her the lowest of thieves. Amid his barrage of insults, my parents escorted them out of the house amidst great commotion. I never returned to that house, leaving them to dispose of the furniture. My ex-husband and his parents began living there, but due to my financial claims, they couldn't make payments, and the house and land were eventually foreclosed. From what I heard from neighbors, they moved to a small apartment and were living poorly. However, according to my ex-husband, his father had pushed all housework onto his mother and berated her so much that she eventually ran away with the family's savings. My panicked ex-husband called me to ask if I knew anything, but I told him I had no contact with her and advised him to file a missing person report. The 2 remaining men filed a police report, and my mother-in-law is still listed as missing, though she hasn't been found. There's been no word from her, though she might eventually return to her husband and son. Now, without anyone to take care of them, the 2 men apparently argue and fight constantly. At work, I hear rumors about Timothy. Due to his significantly lowered standard of living, he transferred to a different department, made more mistakes, and his sales performance plummeted. Though he used to get work through his kind treatment of everyone, his failures in customer service forced him to transfer to a less desirable department known for harsh work like telemarketing. He became exhausted and eventually made a serious mistake of accidentally emailing confidential information to a customer, completely losing his position. This became a major issue in the company, requiring multiple departments to handle it, and Timothy was held responsible and disciplined. Finally, feeling uncomfortable, he chose to resign voluntarily, according to well-informed colleagues. As for my father-in-law, his workplace irritability increased due to fatigue, and when his team members began complaining about mental distress, he was demoted as unsuitable for his current position. This wounded his pride, and he angrily chose to quit, but his reputation made finding new work difficult. Later, Timothy contacted me crying, saying they were living off savings and asking for help, but since alimony was already paid and I had no reason to continue our relationship, I politely refused and blocked their numbers. Finally, free from them and tired of being known as the divorced wife at my current workplace, I decided to accept a job offer with good conditions from another company. Not wanting to depend indefinitely on my parents, I used the alimony to rent an apartment near my new workplace. My parents, though worried, understood my desire for independence and supported my decision. I make sure to spend time with them during holidays. My life is heading in a better direction in this new environment. I feel mentally recovered and able to think positively. If the opportunity arises, I would consider remarrying. This new chapter has taught me about independence, resilience, and the importance of setting healthy boundaries in relationships. Though the experience was painful and challenging, it helped me grow as a person and gain new perspectives on what I want and need. Sometimes loneliness can be challenging, but it has also given me space to reflect and rebuild myself. As I journey down this path of recovery and self-discovery, I remain open to the possibilities the future holds. I look forward to falling in love again with someone who respects and values my independence and contributions, and sharing a life together. This time, though, I'll enter any new relationship with stronger self-awareness and an unwavering commitment to never compromise my values. Life goes on, and I'm determined to make my story one of empowerment and hope. Though the path ahead may be uncertain, I'm ready to face whatever comes with grace, strength, and an open heart. This experience has taught me that there are always opportunities for growth and happiness, no matter the difficulties. With this mindset, I'm prepared to embrace whatever life has in store for me, armed with optimism and determination. As I step forward into this new chapter, I carry with me not just the lessons of the past, but the wisdom to shape a brighter future. Looking ahead fills me with quiet excitement rather than fear. I've learned to trust in my own resilience and judgment. After all, every ending is just a new beginning in disguise, and I'm ready to write the next chapters of my story on my own terms.